Welcome, everyone, to the third episode of Identity International's second webinar series, Palestinian Beyond Conflict. This series will be running throughout the month of December on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 5 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, where we will delve into the evolution of Palestinian identity with our esteemed guests. To receive notifications and updates regarding the series, please follow our social media platforms. And if you miss any of our episodes, please check them out on our YouTube channel. Today, we will be in conversation with Dr. Ghada Karmi. Ghada was born in Jerusalem and was forced to leave her home with her family as a result of Israel's creation in 1948. The family moved to England in 1949, where she grew up and was educated. She practiced as a doctor for many years, working as a specialist in the health of migrants and refugees. She has held several research appointments in Middle Eastern politics and culture at the School of Oriental and African Studies and in the universities of Durham and Leeds. She has previously served as an associate fellow of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, where she led a major project on Israel and Palestinian reconciliation. Currently, Ghada is a research fellow at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter, and she resides in London. Ghada, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello to you. Thank you.
The first question that is the running theme of our entire series so far, and so it will be based on that. And I would like to ask you is, what is it to you to personally? What does it mean to be a Palestinian?
Oh, I don't know how to answer that. I honestly don't know how to answer that. I mean, I have a personal identity which is connected with my family, upbringing, childhood, things like that. But I have, you could almost say, a political identity, which is being Palestinian. You see, I think because of what's happened to us, um, many Palestinians, and especially the ones in exile, have viewed themselves um, as belonging, as members of a cause, as opposed to a nation, a people. That doesn't mean we're not a nation. I don't mean that. I mean in terms of how it feels for us, because of the fact that, and I think this is terribly important, when one is discussing question of identity with any Palestinian, we Palestinians have had quite extraordinary experience with Zionism, because Zionism didn't just take our country, our homes, our jobs, our money, all of that, but it attempted to erase our history and to erase us as a people. So, this is really important, because when you think about other examples where one group of people has taken over things belonging to another group and has been very aggressive and military and killed lots of people and so on. There are many of these examples. But what is so distinctive about Zionism is that it wasn't content with just taking over the place where the Palestinians lived and expelled most of them. It wanted very, very much to wipe them off the face of the map, not just physically, but in terms of history, culture, memory, identity. This is really scary stuff. And so Palestinians, that's why I say Palestinians are members of a cause, as well as obviously being members of a people.
Well, that is very interesting. It shows how unique the Palestinian sort of identity in itself is, is different. I would also say that it's, that idea what you're building upon is a sort of settler colonial aspect of Zionism that often academics do attribute towards. And how do you think Palestinian identity has reacted to that? What has it become? In your own words?
Well, Um, One of the tragic effects of this settler colonialism project um, was the fragmentation of Palestinians. So when you talk about identity or anything else about Palestinians, you really have to qualify that with what asking what group of Palestinians do you mean, because of what Israel has done to the Palestinian people. Um, we are now divided into specific communities. So there are the ones living under Israel's direct occupation, that's in the 1967 territories, West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem. There is the group of Palestinians with Israeli nationality. They live in 1948 Israel, what was Palestine called. And there is the group that lives in camps. These are refugees dwelling in camps, registered with UNRWA. And then there is the group of people like me, those living in exile. And we are subdivided further because the ones living in exile are affected by what country they're actually living in. So each one of these groups has taken on specific aspects which is related to the environment they're in. It's really an extraordinary situation, quite unique. I honestly don't know of any other, anything like it. So, you know, so very briefly, not that I'm an expert on all the groups who are not my group, as you might say. Um, okay, so the Palestinians under direct occupation, of course, feel themselves to be the indigenous people of the land. They fear the Israeli army, so they are in a constant conflict with an enemy that tries to steal things from them and treat them extremely badly, and therefore they've developed a particular character of constantly being alert, um, being in a state of resistance, and fearing punishment, etc. And that particularly applies to Gaza, of course, because what I should have said is within the group who are under direct Israeli rule, they're subdivided further into the people in Gaza, the people in the West Bank, the people in East Jerusalem. And if you look at the people in the West Bank, you find that villages and towns are divided by checkpoints and by Jewish only roads, things like that. That encourages division and the growth of local identities. So it's a really fraught subject, this. And so, therefore, for people like me, because I live in Britain, because I came here as a child, I have developed characteristics which define me to a certain extent, like my English accent, like my English education, like the culture that I'm surrounded by and that I'm very familiar with. And I'll tell you something, it never ceases to amaze me that when we are in a group, Palestinians, for a conference, for a meeting, for whatever, when we get together, what we find, what I found is that the ones from Germany are a bit like Germans, and the ones from the United States are like Americans, and etc. etc. Now, I don't mean they are like that in their inner core or in giving up on the struggle or any of that, but you know the mannerisms, the way they come across, the specific education, all the rest of it. It matters. It matters, and it's inevitable.
Yes, of course. I mean, you what a lot of people forget is that you influence, identity doesn't evolve in a vacuum. There's external influences to these things, and your surroundings make such an impact to that. Based on that, how, I mean, you've referred in previous interviews and in your book of to London as your adoptive home. and that has obviously impacted the way that you see Britain and the way that you live in Britain. How have you navigated through British society as a Palestinian? How has it shaped your work and how how you perceive the cause in itself? Has it as you've mentioned, how does it differ from other members of the diaspora, or other members of people that have been exiled, or even the Palestinians that have been back home?
Yeah, yeah, very important question. Forgive me.
Yes.
Oh dear, that's nothing to do with my identity.
No.
Um, Look, it's been very, very hard because, you know, as any child, forgive me, as any child, you are influenced very much by your surroundings and your peer group. Not only that, but you want to fit in with your peer group. You
Yeah.
fear to be singled out. I mean, everybody knows it. Now, when we came to Britain, there really were not the number of immigrants that you see today and you take for granted. There really were not. Not only that, but there were very, very few other Palestinians. And so we had a difficult challenge in relating to the environment and a society, but at the same time, um, being part of our family, because the family represented Palestine, the Arab world, if you like, and Islam. And that's another aspect of identity. So now, when I talk like this now, I'm well aware that many people watching this who might be second, third generation children of immigrants, particularly from the Islamic world, will very much identify with this kind of thing and will understand it readily. And in fact, so much so that I don't think they think it's a problem, in inverted commas. It's just how it is. Now, in my day, it really was not just how it was. It was very difficult. So I was subjected to two sets of influences, if not three, if not four, But the major influences were the pull, what I can really call as the pull of my family, very much represented by my mother, of the customs, the habits, the beliefs, the whole culture of the Arab world, and especially of Palestine. Um, and at the same time, the, the awareness that people around me didn't saw me as foreign. It was really very difficult. Although I acclimatized, I fitted in terms of culture, customs, all that kind of thing, and language, I was aware that they did not regard me as English. And this was really very hard because you had to say to yourself in the end, where do I really belong? Do I belong with what is represented by my family, or with my peers? Now, in my time, and if in my case, what my family represented was, I have to tell you, very unattractive. Why? Because they related to things I didn't know very well. It wasn't very familiar to me, and there were strictures and rules and things which were related to our origins, our social customs, our religious customs. When I looked at my peers, I thought they were very, very free. They did think there weren't constraints like the ones that I had. And I envied them. I liked it. And so, in my case, I decided I would throw my lot in with them. Given the choice between, my mother saying, don't do this and do that, and don't wear this and wear that. And between all these other people who are saying, it's great, let's have fun, it's who cares? It was really, I threw my lot in with them. I really did for quite a while. And I terribly wanted to be accepted. And I was accepted to a certain extent, but not entirely. It all changed, of course, in 1967, the Arab-Israeli War. To my horror, I discovered all these lovely people whom I considered to be part of my new community were all on the side of Israel in the so-called Six-Day War. Nobody was on my side. And they were so insensitive. They cheered Israel on. They clapped for Israel when we watched TV. As Israel crashed through into Arab lands and took over whatever it found, they thought this was fantastic, great victory. And I remember that moment that for me personally, the long road to going back to where I came from, if you see what I mean, started.
Mm. And how?
Yeah,
Yes, please.
clearly, I was just going to say, clearly, I could not belong to the people who cheered Israel on. However, however many friends I made among them, however much I thought I was understood, clearly, an issue like this, which is so fundamental to me, so important, I couldn't share with them. And so I thought to myself, who do these people think I am actually? That they're so insensitive, that they don't, at least if they want to cheer Israel on, they don't do it in front of me. And then, of course, I thought, right, well, I'm not one of them, and I never will be.
That's very interesting. I think it's a very unique experience, considering you don't hear about many Palestinians having that perspective of being surrounded by, especially during the period of the 1967 war, and being surrounded by people that you might regard as peers at that time, and then having that experience, as a young individual in that society, growing up and being surrounded by people that you've well, it must have been a bit of a shock, to. Who like and brought up a lot of questions maybe in regards to your surroundings. And then you spoke about returning home, and how was that, because you've written a memoir on that, and how is that in terms of going returning to Palestine and seeing the areas that your family have lived in, and the sort of interacting with the Palestinians that have been back home. How did that feel once you did
Mhm.
return?
Well, now I've written two memoirs, about that. The first one, In Search of Fatima, which I think is the one you're referring to, describes the experience indeed of how we left Palestine and coming to London and how difficult it was. But the second memoir, called Return, is one that people might find interesting. That related to the experience of working in the West Bank in 2005. I went to work for the Palestinian Authority because I really wanted to know how the place worked. And I saw all that remained of Palestine, including many parts in the 1948 section, because with a British passport, I was able to move freely, unlike the other Palestinians. And so it's been really quite, I really got to know quite a lot about it. Now, in terms of how I was regarded and how I felt, etc., well, this refers to a second tragedy of exile. The first I was talking about when I said about the question of identity. Do you belong to the peer group? Do you belong to your original family group? And the difficulties that that created. But of course, the second tragedy of exile is that you discover you don't belong there either. So, this romantic idea that you are going back to something, I realized anyway, was back to a childhood memory. It wasn't back to a country I knew that I was looking at then, what country this was. The one I left had certain landmarks, had a certain character. The one I saw when I went to visit Israel, the West Bank, Jerusalem, Gaza, was not the same. And the worst part of it was I really was not accepted. I could feel that. people thought I was alien. Now, I must have been actually very strange. I can understand it because I speak Arabic fluently as they do. I look Arab. So they would have, at first sight, thought, you know, this person is familiar. Is a familiar type of person.
Mm.
But then they soon discovered I'm not. I don't think in the same way. I'm altered by that experience of exile. And really, I had nothing to hang on to. What the memories of childhood are fragmented and nothing. Can't hang on to those. They don't help you. So I really wasn't accepted. Now, that's not to say people didn't like me. I'm not saying that, but I wasn't accepted as one of them. They thought I was foreign. And I have to tell you that men in particular, particularly in Arab countries, not necessarily only in Palestine, uh, after a while just couldn't work it out because I was a doctor and I was uh, comfortable in the company of men, of course, because my colleagues have been male most of my life. Um, Unlike a lot of the modest women that they would have been used to, and after a bit, I realized that they treated me very well. Then I realized why, because they saw me as an honorary man. I don't think they saw me as a woman at all. Now, I'm going back quite a few years, by the way. That's all changed now because Palestinian women give as good as they get. They are very powerful, they are very successful. So that bit of it, I don't think would apply anymore. All, but the rest of it, I can only tell you that was what I found. I wasn't fully accepted as one of them, and I obviously wasn't one of them in the British sense either.
How, if you don't mind me asking, and this is a question that you know, it might be something that you're still figuring out, but how have you made peace between the two?
A
You
very good
know,
question. Very good question. I tell you, it's been very, very hard. Anybody who tells you that they can reconcile these two parts of themselves, just like that, they're not telling the truth. It, it's very hard. Now, I recognize again, people watching this will be of generations where a lot of this has been gone through already by the older generation, the sort of dilemma I had, the struggle I had, will have been endured by the older generation. The younger people, the generation of the children of immigrants have found a different kind of accommodation to the one that I had to. In my time, there weren't precedents. I couldn't refer to lots of other people who were like me, and who therefore I could look at them and think, oh, that's how it works, or whatever. I couldn't. I had to find my own way. And for years, I have to tell you, it tormented me. I did not resolve it early on. I couldn't. I couldn't. And I would swing. It was really very strange because if I went to a part of the Arab world or to Palestine, I would feel myself to be one of them. I would feel it. I would feel that I could identify them. No matter what they thought of me, I could feel that. And then I'd come back to England, to London, and I think, what was that about? I'm this me who lives in a particular part of London and who shops in Sainsbury's or whatever, So it really very peculiar, and I don't mean to undermine it or belittle it. It was quite a big problem. Now I can say that after many years, I did manage to reconcile it, but it wasn't by dint of sort of just feeling fine all of a sudden one morning. It wasn't like that. And I well remember there was a British diplomat who was the ambassador to Saudi Arabia and became the ambassador to Syria. A very interesting man, an Arabist, and very experienced. I met him, I remember, while I was in the throes of this worst period of this conflict of identity. And we were chatting, and I mentioned it to him. He said, "You know, I would do anything to be you." And I thought this was very strange. Why would you say a thing like that? He said, "You don't understand. I am one dimensional. I know about one society, one culture, etc. You have an entry point into both, into two cultures. How enriching. How much I wish that I could have an experience like that." Now, it set me thinking. I didn't think at that moment, oh, he's right and all is well. But it
Mm.
set me thinking, really it did. And I came to my own accommodation in the end. I remember thinking to myself, so what? I'm neither the one thing nor the other, but I'm also the one thing and the other. So what? That's me. That's actually me. And then when I thought that and felt good about it, I think that's when I reconciled those two parts.
Yeah, because I mean, your relentless activism in the name of Palestine, it comes out. It must. So I can see, like, I don't think anyone can doubt your sort of quote unquote Palestinianness or, I mean, the Britishness and British society and how they handle these things. That's, I think, a different matter. But in terms of Palestine and your relentless activism for it and the cause, I don't think anyone can doubt that, even if they hear you speak once. It's very evident. Um, and it's something that you can see is taken proud, you're proud of, and it's inspirational, if I may say. Uh, no, I mean, we have a question for you. Somebody's asking, would you mirror the fracture of Palestinian identity with the unanimity of the Jewish identity as tied to Israel? What can this teach us about the utility of identity in our political struggle?
Yeah, interesting question. Um, yeah, now the tie of Jews to Israel, it fascinates me. It's fascinated me for a long time. Um, you see, for them, for many of them, let's say, Israel has become a part of their identity. That's why, by the way, they become so angry and react so aggressively if you criticize Israel. I understand that to indicate the depth to which they have internalized Israel as people. So when you say, Israel is a brutal apartheid state, you're insulting them personally. So then they go completely mad and so on. So this is a really difficult one. Um, what you see, and there the resemblance ends is the best way I can put it, because for Palestinians there is a link with a reality. It's not a fantasy. Now, Israel invented a whole myth of origin that people who'd come from Europe were actually indigenous, this kind of things that fly in the face of fact, reality, history, etc. They invented them because they had to in order to get the project going. Now, people who therefore support that project have accepted that set of myths, and therefore, when they feel sentimental about Israel or upset if Israel is criticized, they're upset about something which is an invention, a fantasy. It's not real. Um, for us, it's real because it's there. Everybody knows it. Everybody sees it. It's been recorded, annotated, etc. I believe that's a really important difference.
Yeah, now would you say it makes one identity a bit more secure in itself than the other?
Mm,
So
sure.
it. Uh, Well, I mean, it's been very interesting to hear everything that you've said today, especially growing up in exile and how that has it's provided a very unique sort of experience to our series, and especially from the Palestinians that we've heard and we're yet to hear. I'm sure that it's added a very unique perspective on it. Are there any closing remarks that you might want to make regarding Palestinian identity, or sort of what? So anything that you would like to add to the narrative that is taking over the mainstream in terms of Palestine, and especially with the way that the circumstances at the moment with the Arab normalization and the Israel's growing power within the region and so forth.
Oh, well, let me say that the thing that's really significant is the weaponization of anti-Semitism, because you have to look at that. It's Israel has been extremely active on this front, and we in Britain, who saw the destruction of Jeremy Corbyn um, on grounds of the fact that he was a sworn supporter of the Palestine cause, is a real object lesson in the way this thing has been working. And of course, it's not gone away. It's getting worse all the time. Now, to me, that is an indication, and anybody else who might be worried about it, it is an indication of Israel's tremendous anxiety over the fact that the Palestinians haven't forgotten who they are. So in other words, by that I mean, if Palestinian identity had become so diluted, if it had become so diluted as to mean that generations would not be particularly concerned with Palestine, then I don't believe this witch hunt over anti-Semitism would have happened in the same
It's
way.
definitely, yes,
And
please.
sorry.
No, you were saying, please continue.
Yeah, no, I just want to. That brings me to the other concluding thing I wanted to say. That the younger generations, now not all of them, but a significant proportion of the younger Palestinians, to my amazement and delight, are at least as, if not more, committed to the cause of Palestine than our generation, than my generation. And that is truly impressive. So, despite the influences on their identities and where they've grown up, they clearly relate to a fundamental issue for them, which must be part of their identity, and that is Palestine, the fact that the Palestine issue has not been resolved, and that this is an injustice which they have to fight to try to put right. And this is the big lesson for Israel, that was hoping that longer the Israelis hang on, then the Palestinians will gradually fade away and forget. That hasn't happened. And that's a great portent for the future.
And I think that's a very positive note to end on as well. Thank you so much for joining us today and giving us this incredible insight. And it was, very eloquently put. And I would like to thank our audience for watching today. Our next episode will be next Wednesday, not this Saturday, at the same time, where we'll be in a similar conversation with the founder of the Electronic Intifada, Ali Abu Naima. And I would like to thank you all on behalf of Identity International.